How can AI recover an ancient Roman library? That's the question behind the Vesuvius Challenge, a global competition offering millions of dollars in prizes to anyone who can read the charred scrolls of Herculaneum. These scrolls, carbonized by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 CE, are so fragile that they crumble to dust with the slightest touch. For centuries, they've been called unreadable. But for the first time, AI is changing that. Researchers are starting to detect letters inside the fragile layers of the scrolls. Entire words, invisible to the human eye, are now emerging for the first time since antiquity. The Vesuvius Challenge is unlike anything else. The ink used on these scrolls is made of carbon, the same material as the papyrus itself. To an X-ray, the ink and papyrus look almost identical. That's why previous methods to read the carbonized library failed, and why even today, this task pushes technology to its limits. If these scrolls can be digitally unraveled, they could more than double the surviving record of ancient Roman literature. If the scrolls are damaged during the delicate process of trying to read them, those works may be lost forever. This is the story of the Herculaneum Scrolls, the Vesuvius Challenge, and how AI may be the key to unlocking this uniquely preserved library from the ancient Roman Empire. Welcome to Voyager, where we explore new stories in science every week. If you're new here, consider subscribing, and if you're returning, welcome back. In 2023, researchers made an announcement that historians had been waiting on for centuries. A carbonized papyrus scroll from Herculaneum, sealed since the eruption of Mount Vesuvius, had been read for the first time. The word revealed was porphyros, the word for purple in ancient Greek, where purple dye was a substance so rare and costly in the Roman world that it was reserved for emperors and the elite. But this word was deciphered not from physically unrolling the scroll. The papyrus is so fragile that any attempt to handle it causes it to crumble into dust, making it impossible to read by traditional means. Only with modern imaging and AI has it become possible to look inside without destroying the scrolls. Today, only a few hundred complete works from ancient Rome survive. If the Herculaneum Scrolls can be decoded, they could more than double that number. Entire bookshelves of lost philosophy, literature, and history may be waiting inside these charred scrolls. It's an intact library from the classical world, and we've been waiting for generations for technology to give us the tools to finally read it. For centuries, the scrolls defied every attempt to read them. Scholars cut them open with knives and screws, only to watch the papyrus crumble. They applied chemicals in the hopes of loosening the layers, but found that the solutions dissolved the fibers. Each failure consumed more of the library, until researchers realized that continuing meant destroying the very text they sought to preserve. They stopped, placing what remained under glass, waiting for a future that might finally offer a solution. That future has now arrived. But how exactly did modern imaging and AI finally allow us to read these ancient letters? When most people think of the eruption of Mount Vesuvius, they think of Pompeii, the plaster casts of bodies, the outlines of everyday Roman life, and a city frozen in ash. Herculaneum, however, was affected differently. Located closer to the volcano, it was hit by pyroclastic surges of superheated gas and volcanic material. Unlike Pompeii, where roofs collapsed under falling pumice, Herculaneum was buried in a thick blanket of volcanic mud that cooled and hardened like concrete. This difference in conditions meant that while Pompeii preserved outlines of human forms, Herculaneum preserved entire structures in greater detail. Wooden furniture, food, textiles, and even papyrus survived here, where they didn't survive anywhere else. Temperatures reached hundreds of degrees Celsius, hot enough to carbonize organic material, but not so hot that it was completely destroyed. That's why the scrolls survived at all. In the 1750s, excavations of what became known as the Villa of Papyri uncovered hundreds of tightly packed blackened cylinders. At first, they were mistaken for pieces of charcoal. It took time before excavators realized that they were papyrus scrolls, but when they did, scholars immediately recognized their importance. This was a library, preserved intact, something unprecedented in the study of the ancient world. But there was a problem. The scrolls were fragile. The papyrus layers had fused together and the material was brittle. Any attempt to unroll them caused them to fracture and flake apart. Early attempts used knives and mechanical presses. In some cases, the papyrus was literally sliced into sheets, destroying much of the text in the process. In the 19th century, chemicals were applied in an attempt to loosen the layers, but the treatments often blackened the papyrus further, making the ink even harder to distinguish. Despite these losses, a small number of scrolls were partially opened. From these, scholars identified the works of Philodemus, an Epicurean philosopher who lived in the 1st century BCE. Philodemus wrote on ethics, music, and rhetoric, and he is thought to have been connected to the intellectual circle of the Roman statesman Lucius Calpurnius Piso Caesonius, the father-in-law of Julius Caesar, and who is thought to have been the owner of the library. The identification of Philodemus reinforced the idea that this was not just a private collection, but potentially a library of considerable philosophical importance. Still, the vast majority of the scrolls remained sealed. Scholars preserved them, often storing them in sealed cases, with the hope that new techniques would someday allow them to be read without destruction. The wait lasted centuries. Generations of researchers returned to the same question: could the scrolls ever be deciphered? The stakes have always been clear. Today, our knowledge of Greco-Roman literature is based on a fraction of what once existed. Ancient sources tell us of plays, histories, and philosophical works that are now lost. The Herculaneum Scrolls hold the potential to fill some of those gaps. Hundreds of texts, perhaps thousands if more scrolls are discovered, and these scrolls are preserved in a form that until recently could not be accessed. And yet, the idea of solving this problem no longer belongs to only historians and archaeologists. Advances in high-resolution imaging, machine learning, and AI are beginning to reveal letters where none were visible before. What centuries of careful handling and failed experiments could not achieve may now be possible with modern computation. The challenge has grown into something larger than a single research project. It's attracted international teams, millions of dollars in prize money, and an entire open competition, the Vesuvius Challenge, dedicated to finding a solution. For almost 2,000 years, the scrolls have remained a mystery. Now, for the first time, there's reason to believe that their contents can finally be revealed. The idea of reading a scroll without ever opening it may sound like science fiction, but in the last 2 decades, researchers have shown that it's possible. One of the earliest breakthroughs came with the Dead Sea Scrolls. These texts, discovered in the caves near Qumran in the 1940s and 50s, were damaged and fragmentary, but imaging made them more legible. Multispectral photography, capturing images across different wavelengths of light, revealed ink that had faded beyond what the eye could see. For the first time, scholars could distinguish writing that appeared blank under normal light. This was an important proof of concept. Technology could reveal text where none seemed to exist. The next leap was made with the En-Gedi scroll. This manuscript, found in a synagogue destroyed by fire around the 6th century CE, was so badly burned that it looked like a lump of coal. For centuries, it sat unreadable in storage. In 2015, a team led by Dr. Brent Seals at the University of Kentucky applied high-resolution X-ray scans and developed software to digitally unwrap the scroll. The algorithm reconstructed the layers of the papyrus in 3 dimensions, then mapped the writing surface as if the scroll had been unfurled. The text revealed the opening chapters of the Book of Leviticus, perfectly preserved and finally unraveled after millennia. The authors of the research paper of the project wrote, "Without the computational pipeline and the textual analysis it enables, the En-Gedi text would be totally lost for scholarship, and its value would be left unknown." This was the first time in history that a completely unreadable scroll had been virtually opened, and its text restored. It showed that digital unwrapping could succeed where physical unrolling failed. But there's a critical difference between these previous successes and the scrolls of Herculaneum: the ink. The En-Gedi scroll was written with an iron-based ink. X-ray imaging picks up differences in density, and iron shows up clearly against the background of carbonized parchment. The Dead Sea Scrolls also benefited from inks that had trace elements, which made them detectable under different wavelengths. The Herculaneum Scrolls are different. They were written with carbon-based ink, essentially soap mixed with water. In an X-ray, the ink and the papyrus look nearly identical. Both are carbon, both have almost the same density. When researchers first attempted to scan the scrolls, the images showed layers of papyrus, but no writing. This was the major challenge with the Herculaneum Scrolls. The techniques that had succeeded elsewhere would not work for reading the Herculaneum Scrolls. The text was still there, pressed between the layers, but invisible to every tool researchers had at the time. After his successes with the En-Gedi Scrolls, Seals turned his attention to Herculaneum. For decades, he has been one of the few scientists committed to solving this puzzle. His lab has scanned scrolls at some of the world's most advanced X-ray facilities, including the Diamond Light Source synchrotron in the UK. He developed algorithms capable of unwrapping tightly packed layers virtually, producing detailed maps of the internal structure. His team even published methods showing that faint textures in the scans could reveal where ink had slightly altered the surface of the papyrus. But despite years of work, SEALS could not fully bridge the final gap. The data existed, terabytes of microscopic 3D scans, but the letters were too faint to be read with traditional computational methods. The bottleneck had now become interpreting the information from the scans. By the early 2020s, it became clear that AI might succeed where previous approaches had failed. Unlike earlier methods that relied on observing chemical differences between the ink and papyrus, AI could be trained to detect subtle patterns and microscopic shifts in texture and density that human eyes and conventional software could not recognize. This is the moment when the challenge became larger than a single research group. The problem was opened up to the world. Millions of dollars from investors, including $2 million from Elon Musk, were offered in prize money, and the Vesuvius Challenge was born. In March 2023, a new phase began in the quest to read the Herculaneum Scrolls. Brent Seales, the computer science professor who had spent years building methods for virtual unwrapping, joined with tech investors Nat Friedman and Daniel Gross to launch the Vesuvius Challenge. The Vesuvius Challenge offers over $1 million in total prize money to teams around the world, machine learning researchers, computer scientists, classicists, and even hobbyists, to help read the Herculaneum Scrolls. $1.5 million have already been awarded to several teams and individuals who have made substantial breakthroughs since the launch of the challenge. What makes this project so exciting is that it combines imaging, computer vision, geometry, and AI in a way never before attempted at this scale. The goal of the challenge is to use non-invasive technology to reveal letters, words, and ultimately, complete passages without ever physically opening the scrolls. If successful, this may be one of the greatest recoveries of lost knowledge in the history of classical studies. Rather than rely only on a small team of specialists, the founders of the challenge released high-resolution 3D X-ray micro-CT scans of several rolls and fragments. They opened up the tools and data and offered large prize pools to anyone who could help with the task in the pipeline: detecting where the ink is, segmenting the roll geometry, virtually unwrapping, reading the letters, and in later stages, reading more extensive text. When the Vesuvius Challenge opened, participants ranged from seasoned researchers to students. Among them were 3 individuals who would become central to the story: Luke Ferreter, an undergraduate with a background in machine learning; Josef Nader, a graduate student focusing on AI; and Julian Skilliger, a robotics student with expertise in 3D modeling and segmentation. Each came from a different angle, testing ideas on the raw scroll data, experimenting with models, and gradually finding a foothold in the problem. Initially, the challenge offered over $1 million in prize money, and eventually that amount increased as more donors joined, including a grand prize of $700,000 for reading multi-column passages from sealed scrolls. Smaller progress prizes rewarded incremental breakthroughs, such as detecting first letters, refining segmentation tools, and developing software for 3D mapping, things that in earlier decades would have taken isolated labs years to build. Nat Friedman's involvement was key. Former GitHub CEO and early AI investor, Friedman saw in Seales' work something that could really scale, now that machine learning had advanced. He and Gross helped organize the open competition model, releasing the data and encouraging many contributors, not just specialists in papyrology, to get involved so that novel approaches might emerge. One of the challenges was figuring out a method for ink detection. Distinguishing ink required extremely fine scans, careful segmentation of layers, and algorithms that could learn subtle patterns, texture differences, density variances, and carefully study the unwrapped sheets of parchment for any clues. Another challenge was the scale of the task itself. The raw three-dimensional scans are enormous, demanding significant storage and computing power. Segmentation requires either painstaking manual labeling or carefully trained AI models. Every potential letter flagged by the system must then be checked by papyrologists, and throughout the process, academic rigor has to be preserved, results must be reproducible, and every interpretation has to withstand peer review. The process of reading the Herculaneum Scrolls is a chain of interdependent steps. Each one is difficult in its own right, and only when combined do they form a workable pipeline. It begins with imaging. At synchrotron facilities like the Diamond Light Source near Oxford, scrolls are scanned with high-resolution X-ray tomography. These scans capture the interior of the rolls in slices, which are then reconstructed into three-dimensional volumes. Each voxel in this volume represents a cube of papyrus smaller than a human hair. The resulting model shows the internal structure of the scrolls in extraordinary detail, down to the papyrus fibers. The scans reveal where the scroll is tightly wound, where it's warped, and how the layers buckle against one another. But in these images, the ink remains invisible. To protect the scrolls during the scanning, researchers used custom-made, perfectly fitting molds and supports. These molds hold the fragile carbonized cylinders snugly, preventing any movement or vibration or stress that could cause pieces to flake off or crumble. The next step is segmentation. In the digital model, the scroll is not neat or uniform. Layers are compressed and fused, distorted, and sometimes almost indistinguishable from one another. Segmentation is the painstaking process of tracing each layer, often with the assistance of AI, but still requiring significant human input. Teams map out where one sheet ends and another begins, following the warped folds and even tiny fissures between layers. Only when the layers are mapped can researchers begin the process of virtual unwrapping. Virtual unwrapping mathematically transforms the curved surfaces of the papyrus into flattened planes. It's like a tightly rolled sheet of paper carefully unrolled in digital space, without the need to handle the fragile original. The unwrapped layers are then flattened further, smoothing out the uneven contours created by papyrus fibers, folds, and warping. This flattening is essential. Without it, any ink that might be detected would be bent and distorted, making the letters unreadable. Even with the surfaces unwrapped and flattened, the fundamental challenge remains: identifying the ink. Unlike the iron-based inks of the En-Gedi scrolls or the Dead Sea Scrolls, the ink of Herculaneum is carbon-based. For many years, this was the barrier that kept the text hidden. But AI changed the game. Researchers created training datasets by scanning fragments where ink was visible under infrared light, then aligning those scans with the corresponding X-ray data. This gave machine learning models examples of what ink looked like in volumetric data. The AI could then be trained to detect patterns invisible to the human eye, such as surface distortion caused by the presence of ink. A major breakthrough came when Casey Handmer observed what he called crackle, a faint fracture-like texture in the scans that, on closer inspection, traced the outlines of letters. Handmer is a physicist and startup founder with experience in data analysis and became a contestant in the Vesuvius challenge. He spent hours inspecting segmented CT scans, looking for faint, dark light channels and cracked mud-like textures that others may have overlooked. At first, these patterns looked like random surface damage, but once AI models were trained on them, the shapes consistently matched Greek characters. For the first time, the scans were revealing the shadows of writing. Other teams refined the methods further. Some developed algorithms capable of analyzing frequency patterns in 3 dimensions using techniques like volumetric Fourier convolution. These approaches allowed models to detect subtle variations in the voxel data that standard filters missed. Underlying this progress was years of work by Brent Seals and his collaborators. His lab assembled massive datasets, carefully aligning fragments where ink was visible with their corresponding scans so that models had reliable material to train on. Without this, AI would have had no way to learn the difference between noise and signal. This foundation made it possible for open competitors in the Vesuvius challenge to build upon the work, refining and testing new approaches. The result was a complete pipeline. A scroll was scanned in microscopic detail, its layers segmented and virtually unwrapped. The flattened surfaces were then analyzed by AI models trained to detect ink. When the models highlighted potential letters, papyrologists reviewed them to confirm whether the shapes were genuine text or false signals. And when the pipeline worked, letters began to appear that hadn't been read in almost 2,000 years. The results so far have been limited in volume but immense in significance. The first letters proved that the method worked. Words followed, confirming that the long silence of the scrolls could indeed be broken. The challenge was now expanding. Hundreds of scrolls remain sealed, and only a fraction of a single one has been successfully decoded. But the principle was established. For the first time in generations, the words of the Herculaneum library are beginning to re-emerge. And with each step forward, the tension grows. What else is written inside? How much can be recovered? And how can these techniques be applied to other long-lost artifacts? By releasing the scans and offering prize money, the organizers of the Vesuvius Challenge transformed the technological challenge into a global competition. Suddenly, students, hobbyists, professional AI researchers, and papyrologists were all working on the same problem: how to read the carbonized scrolls. The atmosphere is part science, part competition. Prize milestones rewarding each major breakthrough: the first detection of ink, the first to identify letters, the first to recover entire words. Teams regularly post updates, share methods, and compare results, but they also race against one another, knowing that prizes are at stake. Some of the breakthroughs came from unexpected places. Undergraduate student Luke Ferreter trained a neural network that detected the ancient Greek word for purple inside a sealed scroll. His discovery won him a Progress Prize and put him at the center of international headlines. Another competitor, Josef Nader, refined models and independently confirmed the same word, reinforcing the validity of the result. Others, like Julian Skilliger, focus on segmentation tools, making the unwrapping pipeline more effective for everyone. The race escalated quickly. Prize money totaled more than $1 million, with a 700,000 grand prize set aside for the team that could recover multiple columns of text. By late 2023 and early 2024, the competition had narrowed to a handful of leading teams. Some specialized in data processing, others in machine learning, and still others in papyrology and textual analysis. Each group knew that this success would require all parts of the pipeline to work together, but no one knew how much text was truly recoverable, or what would appear once the models began to reveal the shapes of letters. It's a race against one another, but also a race against time. The longer the scrolls remain unread, the more their fragile surfaces deteriorate, even in storage. And beyond the hundreds already excavated, thousands more may still lie buried underneath volcanic debris, waiting for a technology that can rescue them. The sense of urgency is real. And now, at the peak of this race, the first columns of text begin to appear. When the Vesuvius Challenge adopted an open competition model, it shifted the dynamic from slow, isolated lab work to a fast, distributed race. No longer did progress rely on one team's grant funding or the lab's timelines. Instead, hundreds of participants around the world were given access to raw scan data, intermediate results, as well as the ability to build on one another's findings. The effect was immediate. Milestone prizes were set up early: detect ink, find letters, and build useful segmentation tools. These prizes encouraged small but critical breakthroughs, and each time someone posted a partial success, it pushed everyone else forward. Because the challenge required participants to share their code, tools, and even partial outcomes, especially for the progress prizes, ideas spread fast. Someone who noticed a tiny pattern of the surface crackling published about it. Others adopted that insight and refined their own AI models. Archaeologists and classicists who historically worked with fragments and damaged texts see this as a transformation. Federica Nicolardi, a papyrologist in Naples, has remarked that reading from an unopened scroll felt almost impossible only a short time ago, and that this is the start of a revolution in Herculaneum papyrology and in Greek philosophy in general. It is the only library to come to us from ancient Roman times. At the same time, some scholars caution that speed must not come at the cost of rigor. The concern is that algorithmic hallucinations, false positives, patterns that look like letters but are not, might mislead. Multiple teams have emphasized that every candidate letter or word needs verification by experts in ancient Greek or Latin. Some voices worry that overenthusiasm might lead to misattributions or overinterpretation if the technical uncertainties are not clearly communicated. And while AI can highlight potential signals in the data, it doesn't necessarily read in the way that a human does. Every letter requires human interpretation, and the manual piecing together of fragments into coherent words and sentences. Without this final layer of scholarly judgment, there's a risk of technical error and also a risk of the distortion of the historical record itself. Others highlight how the model has democratized what has been a very exclusive field. Students, non-classicists, coder enthusiasts, people without formal training in papyrology have made vital contributions. The work of the team of 3 students, who won the first grand prize, has shown that with good data, shared tools, and open incentives, major discoveries can come from surprising places. There are also institutional implications. The prize fund nudged powerful labs and facilities to allocate time, computational resources, and scanning slots sooner than they might otherwise have done. For example, more scans at the synchrotron, faster sharing of scan results, improvement in segmentation software. All of that accelerated once the competition structure was in place. In short, the open competition model turned what had been a long, cautious journey into something nearer to a sprint. And while challenges remain, no one involved expects the scrolls to stay silent much longer. Finally, after centuries of waiting, some of the ancient writings have been revealed. The breakthroughs aren't total yet, but they're historic. The Vesuvius Challenge, with its pipeline of imaging, AI, segmentation, and scholarly review, has delivered actual text from Herculaneum. The major revelation came in February 2024, when the team of the 3 young researchers won the Vesuvius Challenge grand prize of $700,000. They decoded over 2,000 Greek characters from one of the fully scanned scrolls, representing about 5% of that scroll's contents. What they found was a previously unknown work by the Epicurean philosopher Philodemus, discussing pleasure, scarcity, food, music, and the senses. The text considers whether goods that are scarce are necessarily more pleasurable than abundant ones. These early successes also did more than win prize money. They proved a hypothesis that had been speculative for decades, that the carbon ink in the Herculaneum Scrolls, once thought completely lost to visual detection, could produce signals strong enough, when processed with the right tools, to be read. They also demonstrated that an open, competitive science model could accelerate discovery, many minds working in parallel, sharing ideas and refining tools. More recently, researchers working with P-Herc 172, a scroll in the Bodleian libraries at Oxford, have revealed new words, including disgust, which appears at least twice in the text so far. Other words identified include fear and life. These discoveries suggest that the scroll is discussing intense moral or philosophical topics. One of the most significant disclosures was detecting the title and author of one of the sealed scrolls for the first time. A team was awarded $60,000 for identifying the scroll as containing On Vices by Philodemus. This is the first time that a sealed papyrus from Herculaneum has been definitively linked to a known title and author through AI-based methods. But there is much work left to be done. The full challenge is just getting started. Only small sections of text have been revealed. They still represent a tiny fraction of what once existed. The P-Herc Paris 4 scroll, where most of the work has focused, is about 5% read. Scholars are working to increase that figure dramatically. The goal is to read 90% of several fully scanned scrolls in the next phase of the challenge. In one announcement from Oxford in February 2025, Seal said that a recently scanned scroll contains more recoverable text than we have ever seen in a scanned Herculaneum scroll. This suggests that the P-Herc 172 and its peers may yield far more than earlier fragments, if the pipeline keeps improving. What this means is that the long silent scrolls are beginning to be revealed, and are hinting at a rich collection of thought, philosophy, and moral debate. The partial readings add to writings on Epicurean philosophy and show that entire lost works may be recoverable. And yet, the biggest discoveries may still be ahead. Hundreds of scrolls remain unread, many words are still invisible, entire passages remain too faint to reconstruct. But we've crossed a major threshold, proof that the impossible has now become possible. The rest depends now on persistence, refined tools, sharper AI, and the willingness of many minds to keep pushing. For the first time in nearly 2,000 years, sealed papyri from ancient Rome have yielded their words through the lens of technology. AI imaging and the work of hundreds of contributors have shown that what seemed impossible not too long ago is now within reach. But this is only the beginning. Out of the more than 1,800 scrolls recovered from the Villa of Papyri, only fragments of a few have been read. The implications also extend beyond what has already been discovered. Ancient sources hint that the Villa of Papyri may have held thousands more scrolls, many still buried under volcanic debris. Archaeologists debate whether new excavations should be attempted. The risks are high, the site is fragile, and excavation could damage structures that are themselves invaluable. Yet, if the buried layers do contain the remainder of the library, then what has been found so far may only be a fraction of the knowledge preserved in the buried city. The techniques developed for Herculaneum also have wider applications. Around the world, there are countless texts that are too fragile to handle. Manuscripts damaged by fire, papyri buried in sand, even medieval palimpsests overwritten with later scripts. The same methods of high-resolution imaging, segmentation, and AI-assisted ink detection could bring many of these voices back into the historical record. The tools designed for one library may one day transform our ability to recover cultural heritage everywhere. At the same time, there are debates. Scholars warn that machine learning models can sometimes generate false positives, patterns that look like letters but are not. Every discovery must be verified carefully, letter by letter, word by word, by experts in ancient Greek and Latin. Still, the trajectory is clear. What once seemed like the closed chapter of an unreadable library is now open again. Words long buried in darkness are returning to the light. In time, the Herculaneum Scrolls may more than double our surviving record of Roman literature and philosophy. The possibility is astonishing. Lost histories, unknown works, forgotten philosophies, perhaps even texts we didn't know existed at all. And as we begin to uncover knowledge that has been sealed away for 2,000 years, we're also standing at the edge of another frontier. Researchers are now building AI systems that can design and test their own scientific ideas. Some argue this marks the beginning of a new era of autonomous discovery, and perhaps even the first steps towards artificial superintelligence. If you want to dive deeper into this possibility, check out my recent video on ASI Arc, the research project some have called a turning point in AI architecture development.